I think it's time you move out.
I agree. And you all have 24 hours to move out of my house, starting now.
Hey everyone, it's Clara. And tonight, I need to tell you a story about home. Not just the place you sleep, but the place that's supposed to be your sanctuary. The low hum of a jazz trio drifted from the courtyard, weaving through the thick, humid New Orleans air. Crystal glasses clinked, filled with champagne, and laughter echoed off the high ceilings of the house I grew up in. My sister Chloe stood in the center of the living room, a vision in white, her arm linked with her fiancé, Blake. She raised her glass, her smile as bright and blinding as a spotlight. "And to our most exciting venture yet," she announced to the room of friends and potential investors, turning this beautiful, historic family relic into the most exclusive boutique hotel in the Garden District. A polite, enthusiastic applause rippled through the room. My parents, Richard and Susan, beamed at her from the front row, their faces shining with pride. Relic. The word struck me like a physical blow. I had been standing in the shadows by the grand staircase, my heart hammering against my ribs, a thick manila folder clutched in my trembling hands. This wasn't just a relic. It was my life's work, my sacrifice. That was the moment. The silence I had lived in for years finally shattered. I stepped forward. The music faltered, then stopped. Every head turned. Chloe's smile froze. "Congratulations, Chloe," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the sudden quiet. "It's a wonderful plan, but you forgot one tiny detail in your presentation." I walked to the antique mahogany table and laid the folder down with a soft thud. "You're planning your future on my property." The gasps were audible. If you've ever felt your voice being silenced and knew you had to make a stand, just hit that like button because you'll understand the storm that was about to break. To understand how we reached that catastrophic moment, with my sister's face a mask of disbelief and my father looking like he'd seen a ghost, we have to rewind 3 years. The jazz music and champagne were gone. Instead, the house was filled with a suffocating silence, punctuated by the drip of a leaky pipe in the kitchen and the scent of damp, aging wood. This house, this beautiful testament to New Orleans architecture with its wrought iron balconies and soaring ceilings, was dying. The bank was days away from foreclosure. My father, Richard, a man who always seemed larger than life, had been reduced to a shadow. He'd sunk their entire retirement, over $500,000, into a development scheme that evaporated into thin air, taking our security with it. The letters from the bank were relentless. Each one, with its bold, urgent font, felt like a shovelful of dirt on our family's grave. Chloe was in California at the time, curating her perfect life on Instagram, blissfully unaware or perhaps willfully ignorant of the storm at home. My parents were paralyzed by shame, unable to even speak of the foreclosure notice taped to the front door. So I acted. I was 25, just starting my career as an architect, with a portfolio full of dreams and a bank account full of not much. I walked into that same bank that was about to take our home, and I made a deal. I refinanced the entire mortgage under my name, leveraging my future income, my entire career, as collateral. I worked 80-hour weeks from a small desk tucked into the corner of the dining room, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer terror, ensuring every payment was made. I never told them how close we were to losing everything. I just fixed it. And I have to ask, while you're sitting there, maybe in your car or on your couch, Have you ever poured your entire soul into something for your family, hoping they'd see the effort? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one. Growing up, Chloe and I were planets in different solar systems, orbiting the same family sun but with vastly different trajectories. She was the golden one, the Nola Belle, a term she coined for herself. She had the effortless charm, the magnetic personality that drew people in. She was the star of every Mardi Gras parade, her laughter echoing down St. Charles Avenue, always surrounded by a court of admirers. Our parents orbited her like she was the center of their universe. Her successes were celebrated with lavish dinners. Her heartbreaks were treated like national tragedies. I was the quiet one, the keeper of the house's secrets. The one who noticed the peeling paint on the shutters, the loose floorboard on the third step, the slow, creeping decay that no one else wanted to see. While Chloe was collecting likes and followers, I was collecting estimates from roofers and plumbers. While she was posting pictures from Bali, I was on the phone with the bank negotiating payment plans. I wasn't jealous of her life. I was exhausted by mine. I was the architect, not just by profession, but by necessity, constantly working on the structural integrity of a family that was crumbling from the inside out. They didn't see it as a sacrifice. They saw it as my role. "Clara's just so good with these things," my mother would say with a dismissive wave of her hand. "She's the responsible one." It wasn't a compliment, it was a cage. They defined me by my utility, by what I could fix. Chloe was defined by her brilliance, by her mere presence. I was the foundation, buried and unseen, while she was the beautiful facade, admired by all. And the most painful part was that I let them. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just kept everything from falling apart, one day they would finally see me. For 2 years, a fragile peace settled over the house on Magazine Street. The bills were paid. The foreclosure notices were a distant memory. And then, one humid Tuesday afternoon, a gleaming white Range Rover I'd never seen before crunched up the gravel driveway. Chloe was home. She didn't come alone. She swept in with Blake, her new fiancé, a man with a smile so perfectly white it looked like a threat. He was a real estate investor, she announced, and they were here to plan the wedding, and for him to finally get to know the family. My parents were ecstatic. They saw Blake's expensive watch and heard his smooth talk about market trends and saw a savior, a sign that Chloe had finally landed the success they always knew she deserved. But I saw something else. I watched Blake's eyes as he walked through the rooms. He wasn't looking at the family photos on the mantelpiece. He was assessing. His gaze swept over the high ceilings. He ran his hand along the original cypress woodwork, and he'd murmur to Chloe, "Incredible bones. The potential here is just off the charts." He wasn't seeing a home. He was seeing an asset. He wasn't admiring our history. He was calculating its liquidation value. A cold dread, heavy and familiar, began to coil in my stomach. It was the feeling of air pressure dropping just before a hurricane. My mother would pull me aside in the kitchen, her eyes sparkling. "Isn't he wonderful, Clara? They're such a power couple." I would just nod, the warning bells in my head getting louder and louder. They saw a wedding. I saw a corporate takeover. Right now, wherever you are, maybe it's late at night where you are, or early in the morning, I want you to think about a time your gut screamed at you that something was wrong. If you chose to listen, type "listen" in the comments. If you ignored it, type "ignore." Let's see what we all did. The invasion began subtly, like a vine slowly wrapping itself around the foundations of the house. It wasn't one big move. It was 1,000 tiny keats. My home office, the very room where I had spent countless sleepless nights fighting off foreclosure, was the first territory to fall. "We just need a little corner for the wedding binders, Clara. You don't mind, do you?" Chloe asked, not waiting for an answer. Within a week, my architectural drafts were buried under a mountain of floral arrangements and catering quotes. My space, my work, my sacrifice was being systematically erased. Then came the conversations that would stop the moment I entered a room. The air would go still, and my mother would suddenly become intensely interested in the weather. Blake would talk over me at the dinner table, dismissing my opinions on renovating the kitchen with a condescending chuckle. "That's a cute idea, Clara," he'd say. "But I think a commercial-grade Viking range would be a better investment for the property's resale value." Property. He never called it a home. To him, it was just 4 walls and a Zillow estimate. When I tried to push back, to voice the growing unease in my chest, the gaslighting was immediate and effective. "You're being overly sensitive," my mother would say, her brow furrowed with concern that felt completely fake. "Don't make things so tense, honey," my father would add, his eyes pleading with me to just go along with it. Tense. I was tense for wanting to be heard in the house I owned. I was tense for questioning their intentions. I began to feel like a phantom in my own life, a silent, unseen caretaker whose only job was to not disturb the happy new occupants. They weren't just taking over the house. They were trying to convince me I had no right to it in the first place. The ambush was disguised as a celebration. My mother cooked her famous shrimp and okra gumbo, the kind she only made for special occasions. The smell of it usually meant comfort, but that night it felt like a trap. The 4 of them sat on one side of the grand dining table, a united front. I sat on the other, and silent. After a few minutes of strained small talk, Blake cleared his throat, setting down his wine glass. He reached across the table and placed his hand over Chloe's, a practiced gesture of sincerity. "Clara," he began, his voice smooth and deep, "we need to talk about the future. Not just our future, but the future of this family and this incredible asset." My spine stiffened at the word asset. Chloe beamed at him, then at me. "What Blake is trying to say," she chimed in, "is that we appreciate everything you've done. We truly do. And we want to make you a part of our vision." Blake took over, his tone becoming serious, magnanimous. "We've had our architect and financial planners run the numbers on the hotel conversion. It's a multi-million-dollar project. And as a gesture of our gratitude, Clara, for keeping the lights on all this time, we'd like to formally offer you a 5% equity stake in the new business." 5%. The number just hung there in the air, buzzing like a fly. It was so small, so insulting, it almost made me laugh. 5% for the sleepless nights, for the social life I'd sacrificed, for the constant terror of financial ruin I had shouldered alone. They had put a price on my love, my loyalty, my sacrifice, and that price was a rounding error in their budget. I said nothing. I just stared at them, my gumbo growing cold in its bowl. My parents were looking at me, their eyes wide with expectation, waiting for me to say thank you, waiting for me to be grateful for the crumbs they were offering from the table I had built. And in their silence, I had my answer. I wasn't their daughter. I was an obstacle. I left the dinner table without another word, the insult of their 5% offer burning in my ears. I mumbled something about needing fresh air and slipped out onto the wide, screened-in back porch. The Louisiana night was thick with the scent of jasmine and the chirping of cicadas. I sank into an old wicker chair in the darkest corner, hidden from the light of the dining room, trying to force the air back into my lungs. A few minutes later, the screen door creaked open. It was Chloe and Blake. They stood by the railing, their backs to me, assuming they were alone. "She didn't take it well," Blake said, his voice stripped of its earlier charm, now flat and cold. "The silence is more annoying than an argument." Chloe let out a sharp, impatient sigh. "Oh, don't worry about Clara," she said, her voice laced with a lifetime of condescension. "She's all drama and no follow-through. She'll pout for a week and then she'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She always does." Then came the words that would change everything. "Besides," Blake continued, "the 5% is just bait. It's to keep her cooperative until the new LLC is formed. Once she signs her interest over to the corporate entity, the operating agreement we drafted allows us to buy out a minority partner for a nominal fee if they're obstructing business. We'll find a reason. By this time next year, she'll be gone, and we'll have the 100% control." There it was. Not a plan to include me, but a meticulous legal plot to erase me. The air didn't just get cold, it froze. In that moment, the hurt evaporated, replaced by a terrifying crystalline clarity. I wasn't just being disrespected, I was being hunted. It's a strange thing, a moment of absolute betrayal. It hurts more than anything, but it's also clarifying. Have you ever had a moment like that? A terrible, painful clarity that changed everything, the kind you knew you could never go back from. Share that feeling with me in the comments if you're comfortable. After that night on the porch, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went quiet. For the next 2 weeks, I moved through the house like a phantom, my silence mistaken for surrender. I let them believe I was the same old Clara, the one who would eventually fold. They grew bolder, finalizing their plans, booking caterers, and sending out elegant, cream-colored invitations for an engagement party that was, in reality, a launch event for their hostile takeover, a party they were throwing in my house with my food, under the roof I had fought to keep over their heads. And that brings us back to that moment, to the jazz music, the clinking champagne glasses, and Chloe, radiant and triumphant, announcing her grand vision. As I stepped from the shadows, the folder in my hand felt as heavy as a gravestone. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the applause. I walked directly to the investors Chloe and Blake were charming. "Before you write any checks for this exciting new venture," I said, making direct eye contact with a man holding a flute of champagne, "you have a right to know about the foundation you're building on." I turned to Blake. "This relic was less than 48 hours from a foreclosure auction 3 years ago. The seed money for this project wasn't a clever investment. It was a second mortgage I took out, paid for by the 80-hour weeks I worked while your fiancé was taking selfies in another time zone." I then faced my sister. "Chloe, you always loved playing queen, but you can't sell a kingdom that doesn't belong to you." Finally, I looked at my parents, their faces pale with shock. "And you both watched me do it. You signed the deed over to me because you said it was the only way. Did you forget? Or did you just hope I had?" I opened the folder and slid the notarized, legally binding deed across the table. "You were right. This house is an asset, and it is 100% irrevocably mine." The silence that fell after my declaration was absolute. The investors looked at my family, then at the deed on the table, and simply melted away into the New Orleans night, leaving behind half-full glasses of champagne like relics of a forgotten party. There was no screaming, no final dramatic fight. My truth, backed by legal fact, had been a weapon so effective it left no room for argument. Blake, for the first time, was speechless. Chloe's face was a marble mask of pure, cold hatred. My parents just looked broken. "You have 24 hours," I said into the quiet, my voice flat. "Be gone by noon tomorrow." The next morning, the house was filled with the sounds of defeat. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, and listened to the funeral procession of their departure. The heavy drag of a suitcase across the upstairs floorboards, the hushed, angry whispers between Chloe and Blake, the clink of my mother packing away the good silverware. No one spoke to me. I was a ghost in my own home, a necessary evil they had to navigate around. As my mother passed me on her way out, a box labeled "fragile" in her hands, she paused. "You've torn this family apart, Clara." "I hope you're proud." I looked up from my coffee, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "No," I replied softly. I just refused to be the only one holding it together anymore. By 11:45 a.m., they were gone. The slam of the final car door echoed down the empty street. I walked to the front door and slowly turned the deadbolt. The click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I had won. The house was mine. The threat was gone. But as I stood alone in the grand, silent hallway, there was no surge of triumph. It didn't feel like a victory parade. It felt like the quiet after a storm, heavy and unsettling. Have you ever had to fight for something and won, but felt the true cost of it deep in your bones? Let me know if that feeling resonates with you. I thought the silence in the house was the final chapter. I was wrong. The physical battle was over, but the war for the narrative was just beginning. My phone started ringing 2 days later. The first call was from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. Her voice, usually so warm, was dripping with a syrupy disappointment that felt more poisonous than anger. "Clara, darling, I just got off the phone with your mother. She's an absolute wreck," she began. No hello, no preamble. "She told me what you did. How could you throw your own family out on the street? Your father's not well, and Chloe, that poor girl, has been through so much. To be so cold, so unforgiving, we didn't raise you to be this way." The old me would have crumbled. The old me would have justified, argued, defended, and explained, listing every sacrifice, every receipt, every sleepless night, begging to be understood. But the woman who answered the phone that day wasn't the old me. I let her finish her monologue, a story I barely recognized, a fiction co-authored by my mother and sister where I was the heartless villain. I took a slow, steadying breath. "Aunt Carol," I said, my voice even and calm, devoid of the emotion she was trying to provoke. "I love you, but you have only heard one version of this story. A version that makes you feel comfortable." A shocked silence met me from the other end of the line. "My relationship with my parents and my sister is something I will handle privately. It is not up for discussion or debate. I am sorry they are hurting, but I will not be shamed for protecting myself and my home." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The boundary I set was harder than steel. That call was the first of many, each one a test of my new resolve. And each time, I gave them the same thing. Not an argument, but a door. A door they found, for the first time, firmly closed. After the last angry phone call faded and the silence returned, a new task presented itself. The house was legally mine, but emotionally, it was still a museum of their expectations. Every room held a ghost. The living room held the memory of their judgment. The dining room, the insult of their 5% offer. The whole place was haunted, and I knew I couldn't truly be free until I performed an exorcism. I started in the master bedroom, the one Chloe had instantly claimed as her own. The first thing I did was throw open the heavy velvet curtains my mother adored and let the bright, unforgiving Louisiana sun pour in. I stripped the bed, packed away the designer clothes she'd forgotten in the closet, and scrubbed the room until the faint, cloying scent of her perfume was finally gone. This act became a ritual that I carried through the entire house. I took down the stiff, formal family portraits from the hallway, the ones where we were all smiling, pretending to be a family we never were. I didn't burn them. I simply moved them from a place of honor to a box in the attic labeled History. I painted over the oppressive dark red of the dining room with a soft, calming sage green. In the garden, I finally tore out the sickly, neglected rose bushes my father loved in theory but never tended to, and in their place, I planted lavender and rosemary and sprawling magnolia trees, things that were hardy, fragrant, and unapologetically alive. With every box packed, every wall painted, every weed pulled, I felt the house exhale alongside me. It stopped feeling like a stage for their drama or a testament to my sacrifice. It was no longer just a collection of rooms I was responsible for. It was becoming a sanctuary I was building. The floorboards seemed to creak less. The air felt lighter. It was slowly, board by board, nail by nail, becoming a home that was a reflection of me, not a monument to them. It was a Tuesday in October when the final ghost arrived. It came in a plain white envelope, tucked between a local newspaper and a credit card offer. There was no return address, but I knew that elegant, looping handwriting better than my own. It was from my mother. For a moment, my heart stuttered, a phantom limb aching for a connection that no longer existed. I opened it, my hands steady. The letter wasn't an apology. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. She wrote that she forgave me for the hardness I had shown. She said they were managing in their cramped city apartment and that she prayed I would let go of my anger so that our family could one day be whole again. A year ago, that letter would have shattered me. It would have sent me spiraling into a vortex of guilt and self-doubt. But as I stood there in my quiet, sunlit kitchen, a kitchen I had painted myself, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a profound and peaceful distance. Her words were from another world, another life, a story I was no longer a character in. I folded the letter neatly, walked over to the recycling bin, and simply let it fall. I didn't need her forgiveness, because I had finally forgiven myself for taking so long to stand up. And that's the lesson that settled in my bones. Home isn't a place you are given. It's a space you must create and fiercely protect, especially within yourself. Family isn't an unbreakable bond of blood. It is a fragile ecosystem that requires mutual respect, recognition, and loyalty to survive. Blood makes you related, but it's love and sacrifice that make you family. I had to lose the family I was born into to finally build a true home of my own. I had to tear down everything to build a life of peace on my own terms, and I've never felt more whole. If this story resonated with the part of you that is fighting for your own peace, fighting to build a sanctuary within yourself, then hit that subscribe button and join this community. because this journey of self-reclamation is one we are all on, together,